Welcome back to Over the Middle, the best recruiting podcast around. And as always, I'm your host, Jeremy Crabtree, and I'm the senior recruiting editor for On3. We're brought to you by the amazing folks at YourView, the home for the best live high school football coverage from coast to coast. If it's a top matchup in Oklahoma, YourView has you covered. The same is true in Arizona, Louisiana, Nebraska, Kansas, and other corners of the country. Be sure to log on to watch.yourview.com. Once there, you can subscribe to access to all the games from across the country, or you can pick up a single game matchup that jumps out to you for just $7.99. All right. Whew, can you believe it? We're already hit the playoffs in some parts of the country. I know my backyard here in Kansas and Missouri, we've got the first rounds of the playoffs, and in other parts of the country, we are a week or two away, and teams are kind of getting into the crunch time for playoff seedings. And that's why this week's schedule for YourView is shaping up to be one of the best in season. And guess what? In Kansas, we have the 6A playoffs, the first round in the Kansas 6A playoffs, with 9 seed in the West heading across the state to play Wichita West. That's Garden City playing Wichita East, a great matchup in that first round. Plenty of Division I talent there. All right, the schedule continues on YourView Louisiana with Scotlandville versus Baton Rouge Central. And then up in Nebraska, we've got a repeat of last week's first round playoff game, but there's going to be some good playoff games coming up next couple of weeks to watch out for. So be sure to turn in to that. And then out in Arizona, it's Queen Creek versus Highland. That's a battle between two 6-1 teams that are jockeying for playoff position. And don't forget, you can see all of those games locally with a 7 p.m. kickoff online or at watchyourview.com. All right. Let's dive into this week's topic. So I've been covering recruiting now for a long time, 25 plus years. Okay, honestly, almost 30 years. And I can count on one hand the number of players that have generated this type of buzz that quarterback Arch Manning has already created. He's only halfway through his junior season at New Orleans Isidore High School. He's already such a well-known name that his recruiting is generating its own programming on ESPN. Yes, its own programming on ESPN, and national pundits like Colin Cowherd, Skip Bayless, and even my 13-year-old daughter are asking about where he's going. He's become a generational type recruit that we've not seen since the likes of Jadeveon Clowney a decade ago, or you can even go back further and talk about Vince Young or Adrian Peterson in the early 2000s. But even though Clowney was a big name guy and Peterson was the most heralded recruit to come out of Texas and East Texas in a long time, none of those guys were the last name of Manning. And none of those guys had to deal with the onslaught of social media like we do today. And to help us get a better understanding of why Arch Madness, we've coined that here at On3, is a real thing, we're excited to have back on the show On3 national recruiting analyst Gerry Hamilton. Gerry, welcome back to Over the Middle.
Yeah, great to be back, Jeremy. And I'd like to be the first one to congratulate Arch Manning on breaking NIL records.
Yeah. We'll talk a little.
Jeremy, if he completes 45% in college, which he won't, he's still going to make $3 million a year.
All right. We'll certainly talk a little about the NIL impact here with Arch Manning, because for those of you that have listened to our podcast before, you know that we have covered in depth the NIL impact with Blake Lawrence from Blake Lawrence earlier in the season. So you certainly know that NIL is a new world of college football recruiting. So, but you were down there a few weeks ago to see Arch in person. And like me, you have followed and seen some of the recruitments of all the big name players over the last 20 years, Jadeveon, Vince, Adrian, and even Trevor Lawrence most recently. First things first, let's put this in perspective. Is he the real deal, or is this all about his last name being Manning?
No, I don't think that's what it's all about. I think Arch is a very talented quarterback for sure. We have him ranked number 1 in the country. We have not shied away from that ranking. He has got a great release, ultra quick release. Look, he showed it against Berkeley Prep. He is a really good athlete at 6'3.5", 215, 220 pounds as well. High football IQ. So he's a legitimate quarterback prospect that can have a career in football. I don't think there's any doubt about it. The interesting thing about it with kids nowadays, especially with Arch's last name, is the pressure that's going to come with these guys, and I know we don't want to dive into NIL yet, but it does factor in, Jeremy, is that's added pressure for these guys. It's hard enough to be a quarterback that's handed the ball and there's 100,000 people in the stands and the fan base says, go win us a conference or national championship. Now you add the business aspect of it, to it. And when you're talking about some of these guys are going to make seven figures, Arch is going to break records in football and be a trend setter in football. That adds another dimension of pressure for these kids at 18, 19 years old that we've never seen before.
Yeah.
And so some kids are going to handle it well. Some aren't. I do think Arch has the circle around him. And I think the circle, Jeremy, is more important than it's ever been around these kids because they're now entering a cutthroat business world at 18 years old. So you better have good people around you. And I think Arch has those people around him. Obviously, the most impressive thing to me, Jeremy, I was there and they lost a tough game. They didn't play well. Arch himself says, I didn't play very well. And he plays under duress a lot. Look, at his offensive line is overmatched at times. They definitely were against Berkeley Prep and five-star Keon Keeley.
Yeah.
But Arch handled adversity well. And that's going to be the biggest thing for him because half the people are going to want to see him fail and half the people are going to want to see him succeed because of his last name.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there.
Adversity is going to be huge going forward for him.
You hit the nail on the head right there, Jerry, because I think a lot of folks are questioning, yeah, you guys, everybody, all the recruiting guys are just putting him up there because his last name's Manning. He doesn't play anybody in Louisiana. He's at a smaller school. So you've heard those knocks on him. I mean, that's got to be just impossible pressure to deal with.
Yeah, it's a ton of pressure, but I laugh at all that stuff when people say, well, he doesn't play against great competition. Well, the best running backs that have ever played in the state of Texas came from small schools. They didn't play competition.
Yeah.
I mean, Adrian Peterson-Palestine, Billy Sims played hooks in Class B football. If you're a tremendous talent, it doesn't matter. Look, and I actually think for a quarterback, it's better that he doesn't play on a great team. I've said this before. Playing under duress is what makes you accelerate your growth. Yeah, he's great mechanically from a technique standpoint. He's going to be ahead of the game there. But the more you play under duress, the more prepared you are for the next level because it's not 7-on-7. It's not throw to the first read 99% of the time. It's real football at the next level with the walls closing in. And if you can handle that and show you can handle it at a young age, it really helps you moving forward.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. And for those that don't know Arch's background, he is the scion of one of America's top sporting families. He's football royalty. Let's put it that way. I think that's the best way to describe it. He's the son of Cooper Manning, the nephew of Peyton and Eli, and the grandson of Archie. And as you guys all know, if you're listening to this, you're a recruiting fan, a sports fan, Peyton and Eli and Archie were all SEC stars who reached the NFL. Eli won 2 Super Bowl MVPs, while Peyton's, I think he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So I want to put you on the spot, Jerry. You've seen him play on film. You've seen him play in person now. Does he remind you of any of his uncles, or is he a completely different beast?
I think he's different. He's kind of a cross between those two guys. He's a bigger frame kid like Peyton is. I think he's got an unbelievable release. His release is really quick. I joke around it's the quickest release since Dan Marino, and everybody's like, "Oh no, you Dan Marino?" No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying one aspect of a kid's game. His release is unbelievably quick. His arm angle is always at 90 degrees, similar to Kyler Murray, who was coached by his father, Kevin. But I think he is his own guy. I don't look. I would never compare a quarterback to Peyton Manning. I mean, that is just doing a disservice to a kid. That's like saying a really talented dual threat quarterback is Vince Young in my mind. No, I'm not doing that to these kids, right? Or Michael Vick. I'm not doing that. I think Arch has a chance to have a long career in football. I think that's the best thing I can say about him right now, and that he has the frame and he has the release and he has the feet to put this whole thing together long term and have a career in football. I think that's where the starting point is with the kid as talented as Arch, and then you see how he handles being that an intense microscope and pressure he's going to be under. I say, and I'm not saying this giving a hint of where I think the kid's going to go, but it's going to be similar to what Chris Sims faced at Texas. I mean, the expectations will be unrealistic. So you have to first deal with that and be prepared for that and be mature enough to handle everything that comes with it. And I do think that's where Arch is strong. I think that ability to respond to adversity and the maturity to understand the situation he's going to be placed under, no matter where he goes, is going to give him a great chance for success.
Yeah, two things you hit on right there that I want to piggyback on. I hate making comparisons from one player to another. Everybody, we've done this enough, Gerry, over the years. Everybody wants to say, who's he remind you of? Well, each kid's different and each individual situation different. Each recruitment's different. I absolutely hate that. That's a pet peeve of mine. And I know, yes, we want to draw comparisons, but that's awful, awful tough.
It's difficult. And look, there are some players, right, Jeremy, if there's a running back that is so similar from a frame, the way he sticks his foot in the ground standpoint, the way his pad level looks on tape, that's one thing. But I think the quarterback comparisons are extremely difficult because it's such a processing sport, right? It's such a processing position. It's the most important position in the game of football and the most pressure-packed position in the game of football. So I think that's one where these guys have enough pressure on them as it is. So I just look at the strengths the kid has. That comes from a mental standpoint. That comes from a physical standpoint. And then it's up to these guys to put it all together and maximize their talent. But if Arch maximizes his talent, he's going to have a long career in football.
Well, and he also doesn't have to really look too far to see about overcoming adversity. I mean, because if I recall, his Cooper, his dad, was on track to having a pretty successful college career before he got injured, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and look, and here's the thing. I mean, I'm sure Archie's got a ton of stories about playing in New Orleans. I mean, he's going to be very well prepared about how you deal with the adversity, how you deal with being hit a lot in the pocket, how you bounce back from that interception where the ball's tipped or you get hit as the ball's released, or you release it early because you're accustomed to playing under duress.
Yeah.
So he's going to have all that, the conversations needed around him. But I also think all of this is why they're looking to more of an offensive coach, which I'm sure we're going to get into it from a head coaching perspective in his recruitment a little bit.
So there's also a little bit of mystery that's kind of driving this hype, right? I mean, Arch, unlike every single teenager in the world, doesn't do social media, and he's extremely guarded about his interviews, where we've got some kids and they're sophomores that reach out to us every single day. Freshmen, eighth graders reach out every day wanting us to do interviews with them. Well, here's the number one player in the country, the name that everybody wants to hear from, but he's really, really guarded with his interviews. And then when he does give them, he's also savvy enough to know that he's going to say the right things without actually saying much. So there's a sense of mystery with his recruitment in there.
Yeah, and I don't want to say this is the entire reason behind it, but I do think in the day and age of NIL, you have to be very cautious with what you say. I think you have to protect yourself on social media in a position like his. So I think right now the best thing he can do is not say much, especially not on social media.
Yeah.
Sitting at $2-3 million a year without a social media platform. But then after you sign with a college, you pick your college, then you can break out your social media platform and you're going to exponentially grow from an NIL standpoint. I think the worst thing you can do is box yourself in right now, get too much out there. Every quote taken out of context by somebody. I think that's the worst thing you can do. So I think protecting him right now is by the family protecting him and the head coach protecting him is the right way to go about this.
Yeah, we can touch on NIL here a little bit further, but I do think that the folks at like Blake Lawrence's crew at Open Doors, they have to be salivating at the potential of creating a Arch Manning media machine on social once he does get to that next level.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, Jeremy, not to dive into a different conversation, but I really think NIL is going to be interesting in the next 2 or 3 years. I mean, the quarterback position is where a lot of money's invested in NIL early on.
Yeah.
Some of those guys are really struggling.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to just be very interesting to see what these companies do moving forward. I don't think Arch is a guy that's in play for that. I mean, his name brand is, like I said, it's going to be a trendsetter. But I think NIL moving forward, I'm sure we'll talk about it sometime down the line. It's going to be very interesting as some of these quarterbacks struggle or are handed 7 figures before they ever take a snap, because all of them aren't going to pan out.
Yeah, no, there's no question about that. All right, so let's handicap things where they kind of stand at this point. And keep in mind, we're taping this in late October, so when you listen to this in after December or
we don't
later on in spring, things might be a little bit different here. But Manning has mostly narrowed his focus to 5 schools: Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Clemson. He's visited the former 3 and he's already been at Ole Miss. I mean, and he's going to be in Clemson coming up here in November. I know Us at On3 recently released the first industry prediction on where his recruitment stands. And at this point, it seems like it's maybe the best word, that the Texas Longhorns are in the driver's seat. So Gerry, you're there on the ground. You've been there, talked to Arch. You cover University of Texas quite a bit. Why are the Longhorns in such a good spot?
Yeah, I think they've been the constant. You've heard, okay, it's Texas, Georgia. Okay, it's Texas, Alabama. Oh, it's Clemson, Texas. But the one school that's been constant is Texas. And the reason is Steve Sarkisian. Look, the Texas program is not where Alabama or Georgia or Clemson, I mean, not the Clemson this year, but the Clemson of the past 10 years has been. It's Steve Sarkisian. It's a offensive-minded head coach with a scheme that's very inviting, with a resume of developing quarterbacks that have played in the NFL. He's the modern-day David Cutcliffe for the family, I think. So if all things are equal, Texas makes a lot of sense. Now, Texas is 4-3. They're at Baylor. They're at Iowa State the next 2 weeks. They've had a couple of tough losses. I don't know if a 7-5, 6-6 season is a deal breaker with the Mannings. I think it's more about, what an Alabama or what a Georgia it will chip away at is we're here now. We have 4 NFL offensive linemen here now.
Yeah.
But I do think the one thing that helps Texas is they have an offensive-minded head coach. And that relationship with the head coach, I think Eli's relationship with David Cutcliffe was huge. Peyton played for Cutcliffe while he was the OC, but just that relationship with an offensive-minded head coach that has the scheme and the NFL preparation has Texas in a pretty good spot. We'll see what happens long term.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head as to why picking the right coach is so important. And then that's something both Peyton and Eli did. I mean, don't forget that Peyton went to Tennessee a lot. One of the biggest reasons why was because Cutcliffe, who was the offensive coordinator there in Knoxville, and obviously Cutcliffe ended up in Oxford at Ole Miss. And it is fascinating to kind of see the parallels between their recruitments and how Arch is going through it, and the importance of looking at an offensive-minded coach. So, all right, let's look a little bit at the others. And obviously, Alabama can sell him on, well, it's Alabama.
Right. Yeah, they can sell him on it's Alabama. Look, the other thing I think with Arch's recruitment is where do you go build your own legacy potentially, right? I mean, Peyton has his legacy at Tennessee. Eli has his legacy at Ole Miss, Archie at Ole Miss. So I think Alabama, there's potential there for sure. I think the question with Alabama is who's the OC? How long's the OC there? I mean, there's been a lot of changes in that. And look, nobody's saying Nick Saban's doing the wrong thing, right? He's the best of all time. He's the only guy that's ever kept entitlement out of a great program over a period of time that I've seen in my lifetime, in any sport, by the way. So you don't argue with his success, but what you look at is if a decision's made on scheme, quarterback coach, that relationship, I think that stability is going to play into this recruitment a little bit. You look at Georgia, Kirby's a defensive-minded head coach, but look, I mean, they're the number 1 team in the country. This should be their year. And that's a place you could go build your own legacy as well. So I think there's a lot of things that are helping those two teams, but the one thing they may lack is what Steve Sarkisian has.
Yeah, yeah, no question. You touched on Georgia, and I thought it was a little bit fascinating when Arch talked about Georgia, and he really talked openly about liking the town of Athens. But what also I picked up is he compared it to Austin at one point in the process. So one, it would be kind of scary to think what a Kirby Smart team could be like with a defense and a once in a generation quarterback like Manning. But I also noticed when he talked about Athens, which is an amazing college town, he compared it to the University of Tech, where the University of Texas is at too.
Jeremy, that's a great point. Something we have to talk about with this recruitment is that's huge for Arch. I mean, that comfort, I got that from being down in New Orleans, where he's going to feel comfortable. And I kids say that, and I think people are like, well, kids just saying that. But I do think that's important. I mean, look, where you want to go to sleep and wake up every day does matter when adversity hits at the next level. That is big, to be comfortable where you're at. And I do think Austin has made that impression on Arch. And I think Athens is probably running right there with Austin as far as the place he could see himself at on a daily basis in college.
So where does Clemson fit into this mix? I mean, they sure hit a home run with Trevor Lawrence, and they can try to sell him on being that guy. But they have, as of today, seem to have swung and missed with their second big name 5-star quarterback recruit.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of this process that Arch really liked Clemson and Dabo and kind of the program as a whole in Clemson University. I think they've fallen off a little bit as of right now. I think scheme may not be exactly what is desired, but we shall see on that. Because remember, when this process started, and I believe he treated last June like an official visit process. Clemson got the first visit, right? And they offered him at that camp at midnight, and Dabo spent a lot of time with the family. Then he went to Austin, then he went to Alabama, then he went to Georgia, and then he did the day trips to Ole Miss and LSU. But I think Clemson began this process in a really good position, and I just think over time some others have overtaken them.
Yeah, no, if I recall, wasn't that kind of the first true national moment? I mean, us recruitniks, we knew who Arch Manning was, but him throwing the ball at the Clemson camp was kind of the first time that the national media and the normal college football fans kind of realized, okay, this kid's going to be pretty dang good.
Well, yeah, and a coworker of ours was there and said, all the kids literally stopped when he started throwing. And that doesn't mean they were watching the greatest guy of all time throw a football, but that's where he was at, to your point. That's the first time kids had ever seen him in person, and it generated an extreme amount of buzz when he started throwing the football at Clemson camp.
Yeah. All right. I purposely saved asking you about Ole Miss for last, not because I think Ole Miss is last in his recruitment, because of the special relationship the Manning family has with the school. And Arch was there on campus last weekend when Eli had his jersey retired. It was a family affair. And I think if you're looking for the quintessential perfect recruiting pitch for Lane Kiffin, it had to be last weekend with him on campus. So I'm curious, you're following this recruitment. How much do you think the emotional ties to Ole Miss will play in this?
I don't think they will. Honestly, I just don't think. I think this family's been through this a lot too much, and I think they have such a level-headed process about this recruitment. Look, I mean, I don't know if that is. I don't know if Arch is the perfect fit in what Lane Kiffin does offensively. We'll see on that, but I think look, that was a great day for the Manning family. For sure. What's interesting about recruiting to me, Jeremy, over the years is the things that are perceived as a positive. Again, that may not be the fit for Arch. I mean, he's going to go build his own legacy somewhere else. I think that's really the major question in this recruitment. After you get past, okay, we have a feel what he likes in a college town. He's said it. It's Austin. It's
Yeah.
Athens. That doesn't mean he's going to end up at either one. But then you go, okay, just looking at David Cutcliffe, past recruitments of this family, what's important to them from a coach standpoint, developmental standpoint, because ultimately the goal is to be an NFL high draft pick, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the ultimate goal here. So if it was all about just winning, going to the program that wins the most, he would already be committed to Alabama.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's just be real about it. So it's about more than that. And so I think that's kind of what you got to look at that's the big question for me. Is he going to go build his own legacy somewhere else? And I think at this point, the answer is yes. We'll see what it looks like in a couple of months.
So let me ask you about LSU. The Tigers weren't really a factor in his recruitment, and I guess technically still aren't, but they're going through a coaching change. And could the right hire make them a factor, or do you think that ship's already sailed?
I don't want to say it's for sure sailed. I think the opinion of everybody. Look, I was in LSU in Louisiana a couple of weeks ago. The opinion was there's no way he's going to LSU. I don't play the no way game.
Yeah.
Been doing this too long. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, with who's hired at these universities and how that could impact a kid's recruitment. But I would say right now, very much on the peripheral.
Yeah. I had a college coach tell me that they thought Tulane had a better shot at him than LSU. So that just kind of shows you that's got to kill LSU fans, but also it's just kind of the way it is when you're dealing with such a unique recruitment.
And look, Jeremy, as long as we've been doing this, we know this. Archie Manning's a great prospect, but LSU needs to hire the correct coach for LSU.
Yes.
Right? Yes. That's the most important thing. LSU can, I jokingly say it can fall into a national title every 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much talent's in the state. So the hire, and this is his hire at LSU. He's got to get it right, and he's got to get it right for the LSU program long term, not short term.
Well, I got in an argument with a Big 12 coach last week about which was the better recruiting job, USC or LSU. It was an interesting discussion. I mean, he made the case for USC. I made the case for LSU.
It's LSU. I mean, look, and that's not a knock on USC. Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting conversation. I'm big on LSU over USC, though, from a recruiting standpoint. Because here's the thing, Jeremy, kids that are from 10 to 12, 13 years old, they identify with the school, identify with players, they identify with the conference. So for the next 10 years, if nothing else, LSU is in the SEC. They're an SEC power. They've won a national championship. USC is far removed from that. They're similar to Texas in that argument right now. And look, you said I cover Texas heavily, but they're similar in that regard. And where LSU sits right now, the state is extremely talented. We'll be talking about this in the future. 2024, 2025 classes are off the charts in Louisiana.
Okay.
You have Texas to the west. Alabama's loaded to the east. Florida, LSU's successfully recruited Florida. Orgeron successfully recruited Atlanta. You just look at those states and how much talent is there. And there's no question that LSU is my pick over USC right now.
No, thank you for agreeing with me. And then a lot of the argument of what you made there, because you're right. When you're a little kid growing up in Louisiana, it's ingrained into you that you go play. You're going to go play for the Bayou Bengals, unlike in California where you have so many other things to look at. You have UCLA, you have the limelight of Los Angeles, and you have the Oregon Ducks and Mario Cristobal come knocking on your door. So I'm glad you agreed with me there. So Jerry, appreciate that. So, all right, lay out the timeline for Arch. I know there was a lot of talk on the ESPN broadcast of his game last Friday night that Arch could take spring official visits and later have this over sooner than later. I mean, is that what you're hearing too?
Yeah, I've heard that, we could be looking at a February, March decision at the earliest, or it could get into late in the spring, around spring games, and kind of see what happens with the coaching changes and make sure, there aren't some major changes at the schools you're considering. So I think that timeline that was talked about in that game does play out.
So also kind of we talked about the NIL impacts, but talk about the impact for whoever lands him, what this can do as a recruiting lure for not just the class that he's in, that 2023 class, but future classes. It's got to be off the charts that they can go sell whoever it is, Steve Sarkisian, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, that they can go sit in living rooms with moms and dads of receivers, offensive linemen, heck, even defensive players will want to play with a kid like this.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's huge. I think it's a bigger deal would be a bigger deal for Texas over in Alabama or Georgia. It helps. Don't get me wrong. Those guys are already recruiting the number 1 and 2 classes every year, though, right? I mean, let's be real. It's Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State at the top of the recruiting rankings every year.
Yeah.
So they're already getting the cream of the crop players. But if you look what it would do for a Texas or an Ole Miss, I mean, I look at Texas with Chris Sims, how big a recruit that was for Matt Brown. Did Chris Sims win the national championship? No. Did he end up being a first-round draft pick? No. But look at the players that followed when Texas became relevant again nationally.
Yeah.
Roy Williams, B.J. Johnson, Vince Young, Cedric Benson, all those guys that came after. You look at Peyton Manning at Tennessee, what he did for Tennessee. They were already a really good program. They win the national championship after the year after he goes to the NFL. But he had a huge hand in all those guys going to Tennessee at the time. So when you look at his recruitment, the recruiting impact to me is bigger at a Texas or an Ole Miss than it is at a program that already has 60 NFL players in it.
Oh, it's gonna be fascinating, and part of me wants this to be over so we don't have to get asked 7,000 times a day where we think he's going, but part of me would like to see this just kind of extend just to see what happens, and it's going to be fun to see, and I do love that you and Chad Simmons are just doing an outstanding job on 3 of knocking it out of the park on the coverage, and I know you guys will have it, whatever the scoop is, with him throughout this whole process.
Yeah, we hope so. I mean, look, this is an interesting recruitment to cover because it's going to be as tight-lipped in that circle as any recruitment we've dealt with, as it should be, honestly. So it's one to follow very closely. The Nuggets are going to be you're going to really have to read between the lines on this one, I believe.
Well, and then also trust your sources. Trust your sources that they're giving you accurate information, and it doesn't seem like the Manning family is going to be one that BS's these coaches. They're going to you would think that they would be honest with them.
Well, absolutely. But just look at to your point. There hasn't been 17 visits to schools. Mm-hmm. This thing's already pretty much locked in. If you see a new school emerge, you know it's serious, right? If he shows up on a campus outside of the 5 we've talked about, then you know somebody's making a strong move because they're not going to waste people's time. And you look, the visits this fall have been the same as the summer, and that tells you a lot about this recruitment and where it's headed.
No, definitely. All right, Gerry. Thank you again for joining us here. I knew I had to get you on to talk about the hottest recruiting topic so far this season. Honestly, maybe the hottest recruiting topic that we've seen in a generation, especially after you went down there and see him in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I heard you talking on the Open about Booker T. Washington. I was there last week.
Okay.
Gentry Williams looks tremendous now coming off his injury. The head coach there actually played with Peyton at Tennessee and was an NFL draft pick. And he said 2 weeks ago was the first time Gentry looked like his old self.
Wow.
Looked explosive again. The junior Micah Tease was at Notre Dame last weekend. He's number, I think, 126 in our junior 300. Big time player. They have, I counted 8 to 10 legitimate Division I players, mostly skill guys, a couple of edge guys, but they have 10 legit guys on that team.
Well, that's one music to the ears of Sooner fans who love that they're getting the Gentry Williams, a healthy Gentry Williams, but also music to our viewers here at YourView to be able to see a tremendous game like that. And but Booker team, and gosh, for years they've just been one of the premier high school programs, not just in Oklahoma but nationally. They're right. So well coached, and what they do for that community, it's unlike anything that we see anywhere else in Oklahoma.
And I'll tell you, something I learned there. I know we got to get going, but it was so interesting to me talking to this coaching staff there. I did not know this about Booker T. Washington High. 70% girls, 30% boys in the school. And it's an interesting dynamic at that school. It's not a school, the way the zones work in the Tulsa area and the way the school districts work. Chris McClellan's one of the top D tackles in this 2022 class. He goes to Owasso. He literally lives behind the school, didn't get it into the school for whatever reason, which I don't understand. But it's just very interesting. 70% female, 30% male at that high school. So the athletes they do have, it makes it even more impressive to me because they're not working with the numbers of some schools they play.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right, and they do have some tremendous girls athletic teams there at Booker T too. So it's folks listening to us in Oklahoma certainly know that, but from a national standpoint, I would put it up there with any of the top programs in Oklahoma, Florida, Texas. Texas, put it up in Oklahoma, Texas, Florida, California, just because the way that it produces players consistently and what it does for a community. And if you not been to a game on a Friday night and you're listening to us in Oklahoma, one, watch us on your view, but then two, head over there and check it out because it is such an incredible atmosphere. So, all right, Gerry, thanks again for joining us. That's it for this week's edition of Over the Middle. Once again, I'm your host, Jeremy Crabtree with On3, and we could not do this without the fine support from the great folks at YourView. YourView is your home for the top high school football matchups from Arizona to Rhode Island and everywhere in between. Head over to watch.yourview.com and check out some of the great matchups slated for this week. And don't forget about those monster matchups Friday night in Louisiana, Arizona, Kansas, and Oklahoma. I know I'll be logging in to watch them, and you should be too. Before we go, show us some love for your favorite recruiting podcast by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and also on SoundCloud. And also be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so you get this podcast every single week on your device. Thanks again for joining us on Over the Middle. God willing, we'll talk to you again next week.